Hi everybody, welcome to the first StoredIQ User Group of 2017. It's been a hot minute since we've had a StoredIQ User Group, so thank you for all those that are in attendance. We do have a pretty packed room, which is exciting. We have two presenters today. The first is Jim Sikes. He's the worldwide ILG technical sales leader at IBM and a StoredIQ expert. We also have Scott Burt, who will be joining us. He's the CEO at Integro and an ECM and ILG expert. So today we're going to be talking about StoredIQ as a long-term solution. Jim will start off by providing some context, some case studies, real-life examples. We'll go to a quick kind of like discussion session with Jim and Scott, and then at the end we will have time for Q&A with the audience. A few quick housekeeping notes. At the end when you have questions, you can ask a question in two ways. Since this is a user group, it's meant to be like an educational, informative, collaborative group. So you can ask questions in the question box, or you can also raise your hand by clicking this button here. And then we will unmute you and you can ask the questions in real life. How exciting is that? So without any further ado, I guess I'll let Jim start chatting about StoredIQ.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Jim Sikes. As she introduced me, I do lead the technical sales organization for IBM's ILG practice. And what I wanted to really go through today was a little high level of, kind of reinforcing why this is so important, why visibility into your information is so important, but really how it's not about the quick win now. It's about being prepared for the future, moving forward, and staying in continual compliance and constantly having some sort of visibility into your data. So next slide, please. So when we talk about your data that's out there, we can really bucketize it in three high-level places, right? The cost of the data versus the risk versus the value. And we know these numbers are all over the place. We know it's growing, we know it's expensive, the next day it's cheap, and then the next day it's expensive again. But how do we really quantify that around the business, especially moving from year to year with new challenges, new business directions, and really an ever-evolving environment that we live in? Next slide, please. So real quickly, when we take a look at the data that's in your environment, I think we can all agree that the longer that we hold on to it, it increases our risk. It doesn't necessarily do anything for our cost because storage is storage and environment is environment, but the value kind of goes down, especially over multiple years. Next slide, please. So when we talk about addressing this, we want to take a look at it from a maturity perspective. So I want everybody to take a look at this. And as you're looking at this maturity curve right here, I want you to visually put your finger on where you think your environment is. And really think about that, right? Because the vast majority of our organizations, we think, well, we have business processes, we have policies that we try to enforce, but are we actually making business decisions about it? And then we start to question what's the quality of that information. Well, and we start to slide back down the hill of our maturity, right? And don't necessarily think now that we've got a good bead on our data. So when we simplify how we get from the mountain of information that we have to a data-driven business and how we prepare ourselves for the future and maintaining that visibility, next slide, we're going to break this into really 5 phases. And 5 phases that you have to just accept, address, and then overcome, right? Accept the fact that you're not sure about your data and that it is overwhelming. There's a ton of it out there, and being able to put some sort of structure or controls around it so that you can manage it, so that you can confidently go forward, so that you can respond to audits, so you can be ready for the ever-changing rules around governance and compliance, right? So let's think about that for a second. Regulations are constantly changing. Just because you're prepared for today doesn't necessarily you're prepared for tomorrow. A wonderful example that's pretty much shaking the world is the GDPR, or the General Data Protection for privacy information that's in Europe right now. It's changing the game. You have to be ready to address those policies. You have to be ready to address those changes and how you manage your data. So yes, it's nice to clean that house. It's nice to have a good organized environment that you can respond to. But is it actually meeting those requirements going forward? Next slide, please. So when we talk about how this goes into practice and how environments that are leveraging StoredIQ right now to do that, you gain your visibility of your entire environment. Now this example here is from a cleanup perspective, right? But let's face it, most environments are going to continue to be dirty. They're going to continue to have stuff in it that you don't necessarily need. So this is something that you continually have to do. But you have to do that within the confines and the construct of regulations and rules and legal processes and records. It's a mountain of things that you have to follow. But you can't necessarily address that unless you know what it is. So as you understand your environment and you start to organize and pan for those nuggets of gold in your environment, you're able to pull it down to just that information that brings value to your environment that you can be ready for. Another example, right? Volkswagen. There were some discrepancies around the fuel consumption for diesel, right? That caused an echo effect of, I need to know about my data. When we look at the oil and gas industry, same thing. When something happens in the world, you have to be prepared. You have to have the posture. You have to understand your data. So instead of constantly reacting and scrambling and riding that compliance roller coaster or that audit roller coaster, right? It's kind of like getting ready for Thanksgiving. You consume, you consume, you consume, you consume, you consume, and then you're ready, and then you release the belt, you relax, and then chill and go back to the way you were doing. That's not the way to operate, right? You need to maintain that visibility. You have to be ready for the future. You have to have that visibility into the future. So that's really the big picture, that continual compliance, that being ready for tomorrow. And it really doesn't matter about the industry either. And it could be as big or as small as it really needs to be. The banks, loan originations, the mortgage crash in the United States, several years ago. It's ever evolving. And so is your data. And it's ever growing. So you absolutely have to have not just the solve the problem now, but be in a good posture to be prepared for the future. Being able to see into those areas of file shares, SharePoint, FileNet, Documentum, right? All those places that we've basically Pavlovian taught all of our users, put stuff here. But if you're not prepared for the future, if you don't always have that visibility into those environments, you will expose yourself. You will overcomplicate the respond. You will be absolutely shocked at how do I overcome these new rules. I don't know what I don't know. So leverage something like StoredIQ for that, right? Leverage StoredIQ. You have it deployed. You have your environment. You've got your visibility. Let's just work around what that construct is. Let's create some new filters. Let's build information sets that allow us to respond to that without fear and respond in confidence. And then we can go back to that maturity slide, right? And go back to those 5 phases. Now we really do have visibility into our data. Now we are able to classify. Now we are able to have business processes that are absolutely optimized, where we know for a fact that we are auditably applying corporate policy to this data. And we're able to make real decisions, and decisions in real time. So I guess with that, as we set that stage, I would love to hear what everybody has to think about this and have a conversation around this.
How about we start with some polling questions?
Yes, that'd be great.
So I have two polls that are prepared. One is, the first one will be for the audience, what is your relationship with StoredIQ? I'll launch that now. So you should be able to see the poll. Feel free to vote. The options are own it but don't use it, own it and using it, don't own it but want to learn more, or just here for fun.
I'm here for the fun. I don't know about everybody else. I just love it.
You guys are doing a good job of voting. Just a few more, it looks like. And just so you guys know as well, this the StoredIQ User Group is also on LinkedIn. So if you want to stay up to date on what we're doing, different updates on StoredIQ, support, whatever it may be, I highly recommend that you join that group because that's where we post most of our information, all of our information.
I'm excited about the poll. I can't wait to see it.
Can you see the screen up where it lets you vote, or do you not see it as a panelist, Jim?
I do. I see the quick poll up, but
Okay.
I'm not allowed to vote.
All right, I'll close it in a moment, guys. Get your votes in. All right, I'm closing it now, and I'll share the results.
Yes, fun for the win. I love it. Owning and using it and having fun. Okay, so actually, you know, I'm really curious about the don't use it. That's one that's really interesting for me because when we talk about visibility into the unstructured data, it's kind of use case agnostic. I mean, there's so many selfish things that every business unit or individual even could leverage from having this type of visibility into the data. Of course, you know, internal politics and I own this, you own that, that always gets in the way, and I understand that. But that's a really interesting one. I like that. But that's the great foundation for questions moving forward.
So our next question is going to be, if you're using StoredIQ or if you're looking at StoredIQ, the question's worded a little strangely, but I want you to think of it as whether you own it or whether you're looking to use it, what are you going to use it for? I will launch that poll now.
I think we need some really good, like, 70s game show music to go on. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, but if we put this up on YouTube, we would get famous for, like, copyright infringement.
Oh, that's right. That's right, yeah. I know I can't afford the rights.
Yeah, right. Ooh, the results are coming in, guys. There's still quite a few people who need to vote, so I'll leave the poll up for a bit more.
Yep, no coffee refills during the voting. You got to be able to press the button.
So Devin, I see that you asked, what if you're using this for multiple items on the list? I would just pick the one that is like top priority, and if you want, you can talk about what other reasons you're using it for as well. I'm happy to unmute you.
Yes, I would love to know that.
Okay, so still some people who can vote. I'm going to leave you in suspense until we get more votes in so that we have the best results. Okay, I'm going to show the results now.
There you go. That's the big one. I like to see that. I like to see that. I've said it for years. A clean house is an easy house, right? When it comes to your data, yes, we're bound by regulations. Yes, we're bound by rules. Oh, there's so many things and controls that we're bound by around our data. But along with that, there are concessions to actually get rid of it and dispose of it. You know, when I look at my own environment in my home lab, I still have ISOs of Windows 98 SE. Why? Right? So that's great. I like to see that. E-discovery, let me tell you, that's always big. And that's like the next step, right? Because if you do have that clean house, when you talk about e-discovery or litigation response or policy compliance or just understanding and governing your data in place, along with mergers and acquisitions, right? Mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, even though nobody voted for that, this is a fact of corporate life today. There are constant changes. And an enormous factor of that is, what do we keep? What do we give? What do we take? What do we accept? There's massive amounts of liability around that. So always keep that in the back of your mind. And I can't wait until we open it up for questions and comments later on interactively so we can talk about the multiple uses of StoredIQ.
So I'm going to have to apologize for Scott Burt. He seemed to play hooky on us today, guys. He does have some important internal meetings that he's doing at Integra, so I guess we'll have to cut him some slack. Jim, how would you like to proceed? Would you like to open it up for questions from the audience?
Heck yeah, because, you know, cat's away so the mice will play, right? Let's do it. Okay. Let's open it up. Let's get everybody interactive and have a really good conversation around this.
So if you'd like me to unmute you and you'd like to ask any questions or talk about your experience with StoredIQ and how you're using it long-term, or suggestions for how to use it long-term, now is the time, because Jim is the person that you want to ask.
Yeah, don't be bashful. This is being recorded, so I could be held liable, right? So come on, ask away. I'm ready.
Seems like the audience is a little shy.
Oh, come on. There's 24 of you out there. I know somebody's got a question or comment.
Devin, would you like to talk about the different ways you're using StoredIQ, since you mentioned you have multiple ways you're using it?
Please, please, please. I'm curious.
Okay. And Devin, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, and then Mark raised his hand. Mark, I'll let you chat after Devin. Devin, you're unmuted.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Devin Grant. I work for JB Hunt, and we're using StoredIQ and StoredIQ for Legal to handle the litigation holds and future requests that are coming in. So if the legal department has a particular data set or data request that they need, it'll go through StoredIQ for Legal, and on the backside of that, we'll go and grab the data, create a collection, and store it in our FileNet environment. We're also undertaking a project to clean up our legacy data on our file shares. So we're going to be using StoredIQ to do a discovery of what's on the file shares so we can classify the data and set retention schedules for that.
Oh, that is great to hear. I will definitely say, don't be surprised at what you find.
Right.
You know, it never fails. It absolutely never fails. When you start looking into file shares specifically, right? It's an interesting pile of data, right? As a new user, a new employee comes in, you get your email address, you get your user ID, you get your badge, and you get your home drive. And you immediately think everything is mine. It's my email. It's my home drive. It's my stuff. Well, what do I do with my stuff? I put it out there. So you will be absolutely amazed at what you'll find out there. there was one particular movie that was heads and shoulders above any other title that we just found. Movies.
Interesting.
Movies, right? Now, you'll see statistics around over 60% or 70% of the data that's in your unstructured data is of no value, right? You'll see that shock number. Well, okay, value is by perspective, isn't it, right? Because an ISO of an operating system might not be valuable to finance, but it is certainly valuable to IT. So really, when you're talking about that legacy data cleanup, one thing that I would straight up encourage you to do is, first off, take a look at your prohibited files policy and see how well that prohibited files policy that's established for your company is enforced, and compare it with what you find, especially as you're looking at those mismatch of file extensions, MP3s being renamed TXT, things of that nature, right? You have the ability to see like that, so leverage that. The next step is taking a look at the broader aspect of it. I don't necessarily need to delete it, but I need to be aware of it where it's at to ignore it. And this is the IT type stuff, database backups, file backups when you're doing migrations, or, you know, let's say the DBAs are working on a SQL database and they make a copy of it before they start monkeying around on the inside of it. Did they actually clean up after themselves, or are there just 10 copies of that database sitting out there, right? That's the other half, that 69% that is of no business value. Well, again, it depends on perspective. But I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. And that would be my biggest point of advice to you as you start to do that, is take your environment in chunks, take a look at it, and you've already got the rules in front of you, right? You have prohibited files policies, you have acceptable use policies. That's your guideline. Leverage it.
Okay, appreciate the advice, Jim. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Devin, for sharing. Mark, I'm going to unmute you now since you have your hand raised. Again, if anyone wants to ask questions, add any of their personal insights, please feel free to raise your hand or ask a question in the question box. Mark, you can now talk.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, Jim, Mark Hickok. This is, I really appreciate Integral for hosting this user group. Obviously, I'm sure there's a number of people that tune in kind of to hear where we're taking the product, you know, what they can expect in the future, maybe not only for StoredIQ, but if you can, StoredIQ for legal. You know, obviously, even though it's recorded, we won't hold you to it because nobody knows what the future holds. And all of the talk about cloud that we hear from anybody and everybody, you know, it'd be good if you could maybe touch on cloud aspects, you know, whether StoredIQ in the cloud or even access things in the cloud is on the horizon.
Sure, yes, that's great stuff right there, right? Because the industry in a whole, technology in a whole, we're really good about grabbing onto buzzwords and writing those without a defined destination, right? Cloud, hybrid, on-prem, off-prem, private, public, all of those things. Let's strip away absolutely all of that, and let's just talk about data, right? When we talk about data, that unstructured data, and as far as StoredIQ is concerned when it comes to that unstructured data, it's about the flexibility of trying to gain that insight no matter where it resides. So the appliances themselves are OVAs, they're virtualized appliances. So you can deploy it in most virtual infrastructures, right? Obviously, VMware's ESXi environments are what are supported, and going forward, more, right? But it's, from StoredIQ's perspective, it's not necessarily about cloud versus not cloud. If we look at it from those two categories, it's about looking into those environments. So being able to index environments such as Box, which is a cloud-based source, or being able to index Exchange locally, or indexing Exchange in Office 365, right? Now, There's always network constraints. There's always performance constraints when you're reaching across the wire and doing this type of indexing. But the key factor is being able to have the visibility into that data really no matter where it resides. Now, as we talk about supported versus unsupported sources, we do have all of our supported protocols and sources that are updated every time we get a new version that's publicly available. We can provide that link. That's ever evolving. We are always listening to our customers or prospective customers. Anybody who would like to use it, I would just randomly pick somebody off the street and ask them, what's important to you? What data where is important to you? And can we actually index that? It's very important, right? Because at the point of this conversation, the environment, the data itself, everything is ever evolving. So long-winded answer to dance around a whole bunch of different things, but from a StoredIQ perspective, from an IBM perspective as it pertains to StoredIQ and what its future is, well, the future is quite bright. I mean, it's about being as flexible and a hybrid, and I use that term because it is a hybrid, wherever that data resides, ability to enforce legal processes or garner the ability to intelligently index that information so that you can make decisions about it. Being as flexible as it can be to enhance and optimize your existing business processes and your existing and future infrastructure directions, not just pigeonholing you into one place or another, but having that flexibility now and going forward.
Great stuff. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
That is good stuff.
It looks like we have someone else, Michael from UNUM, who'd like to talk a bit, ask a question, what have you. Michael, I'm going to unmute you now. Feel free to chat.
Okay. Hi, I said my name is Mike Marley. I'm from UNUM, and we're in the process of implementing StoredIQ to, among other things, clean up some file shares and identify files with, for example, social security numbers and make sure they're where they're supposed to be. And as part of that, we've been engaging with, our various business areas versus just sort of going ahead and deleting and moving and information. And I was just curious to what extent any of the other participants on the call, if you are sort of using it for the same stuff we're doing it, to what extent you're engaging with the business and or not, and if you are, what steps are you taking to go about that business engagement?
So I want to take like 1 minute to respond to that, and then Kristyn, if you could look for hands that are raising to answer, because I don't want to dominate this answer. So that is a great question from a perspective of how do I move forward, right? And how is everybody else accomplishing that? So I will speak from experience that I've had years with StoredIQ in addressing that. And I candidly always say, you like to start with a business unit that's friendly to IT, right? Because you don't want to end up in the situation of project cha-cha, right? Making a little progress and then going backwards, making a little progress and going backwards. And that's the beauty of StoredIQ, is that you have all the information to make the decisions before you move the data, so you don't have to roll back, right? You get all the permissions and the approvals before you actually act on the data, and that's a very important piece. So I always recommend working with a business unit, one team or organization first, that is very interactive, that likes to give that kind of feedback, that has a good relationship, so that you can get that momentum, get a little bit of success behind you. And when you do stumble, right, it happens. This is real production data and environments. You will stumble, but when you do, you minimize the negative aspect of that, and you learn from that, so that when you do go across the rest of the organizations and make it a much broader and bigger project, it's not that big of an issue. So having said that, Kristyn, do we have any raised hands that would like to speak up to that?
Not yet. Michael, would you mind repeating the question? And folks, if you want to answer Michael's question with your experiences, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
Hi, sure. The question specifically is with regard to the level of business engagement and the method for business engagement when you're deleting data. Obviously, you know, StoredIQ gives you the ability to go in and find files, some of which, you know, may have met retention and would technically be available for disposition, but sometimes business units want to keep that data. So we've been sort of engaging or trying to engage with each area of the business that we're deleting information from or potentially deleting information from to sort of get their input before we take action. And I'm just wondering, you know, what other participants are doing in that regard. Are you just going ahead and deleting the data? Are you engaging with the business? And if you're engaging with them before deleting information, you know, how are you going about that?
No one has raised their hand yet. Apparently the audience doesn't know how to respond to your question. Seven, you are unmuted, so feel free to answer.
Yeah. Was the speaker's name Mark? Was that who was asking the question?
It's Mike.
Mike, sorry. Mike, the question I have for you is, does your company have a non-record policy?
I'm not sure what you mean by a non-record policy.
Yeah, so what we do to help, I guess, convince the business that something is not needed, we've rolled out 2 different policies that cover non-record. So there's a business critical non-record and a non-business non-record policy. So any type of personal data could fall under that. Any type of items that aren't an official record could fall under that. So that could help with the decision to purge some of the data that the business is actually holding on to. So if it's duplicative, anything that falls into that category, it's an easier conversation to have if you have.
Right, I think I understand what you mean. Yeah, I mean, we have one policy on information and records management. However, that would cover both records and non-records. And essentially the policy is that if a piece of information, record or non-record, has met any applicable retention period, which there wouldn't be if it's non-record, if it doesn't have a legal hold and no longer has business value, then it would be expected that it would be disposed of. So, you know, there's that hook. You know, sometimes we, you know, conduct internal audits too, which gives us a little bit more of a hook, I would say, towards deleting things to the extent, you know, it focuses on that particular issue. So I'm not sure, like, if you're a company, you know, like when you're doing that, you know, I guess I would ask, you know, do you go out to a particular business area, like, you know, whether that's, you know, I don't know a particular business, but, you know, whatever particular area, you're going out and saying, hey, StoredIQ found these bunch of files that are older than 7 years and haven't been accessed.
Exactly, yeah. So there's going to be a conversation that happens once we actually start into that. I can speak to how we think it's going to play out. Since we actually haven't started doing it, I can't tell you the specifics on how this is actually happening, but after we identify the files in StoredIQ and we get an idea of what's on the drives, we'll take that data back to the business units and say, this is how we perceive that this data should be classified. These are the retention periods for that data. This is the data that's uncategorized. Do we need to make a new policy that governs this data, or is this considered non-record, and have that conversation? Once we get that decision made, then we'll work with the teams that actually manage the file shares to dispose of the data that's not needed.
Okay, so you're essentially obtaining input from the business area as to whether it ought to be deleted, and then working with IT essentially to delete it once you make the determination. Okay, I mean, that's essentially what we're doing too through the use of the CSV reports that you can generate in StoredIQ. So it sounds like we have a similar approach. I was just wondering if, you know, others were taking maybe a different approach and just trying to stay flexible in terms of how we're approaching it to see if there's maybe more effective way to go about it. So if anybody had any different ideas, certainly would be happy to hear them.
Mike, Rich Tolbert has also raised his hand. Rich, if you'd like to add your comments.
Yeah, I mean, well, first, not everyone in the group's going to raise their hand to answer that, because some folks might be concerned about speaking how their organization disposes of things. So, so I will present an alternative approach that someone might be using somewhere yet to be named. In the records management world, forever and ever, people tend to look for approval after the fact. It's now time to destroy this record. Are you good with that? Is it still on legal hold? And in this scenario, it's not uncommon. Shared drive cleanup. After we found something, are we ready to get rid of it? I would contend that you can flip it. And if you communicate to your user community in advance, we're going to start a cleanup of such and such at a certain time, and here's what's going to happen. A certain population of the users will proactively start to clean up their own stuff before someone else helps them. So that's a good thing. But then secondly, define what your intended actions are with certain types of information. And, oftentimes kind of some of the first types would be the duplicates, the really, really old stuff, as you described, clearly some trash or trivial, maybe some confidential things where regular expressions match Social Security numbers or something like that. But, define in advance what the actions are for each type of information found, get the approval from the leadership, the organization in advance, and then part of your early communication is, here's what we're going to be looking for, here's, what we're going to do with it. And some people, like I said, will clean up in advance. Maybe not necessarily delete things right away, but quote-unquote quarantine them for some amount of time. 3 years is common law statute of limitations. Might not be a bad bet on a quarantine. Quarantine is setting it aside and hiding it from the users. And if someone notices something gone that they need back, they've got 3 years to say something. And then at the end of the 3 years, maybe truly dispose. But rather than ask permission after the fact, I'd contend that you can kind of flip it around, explain what we're fixing to do. All the actions are pre-approved. If something goes missing you need, come get us. We'll get it back for you. But maybe just be a little more aggressive up front and just handle the exceptions as they arise.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that comment. We were actually thinking a little bit about doing that with at least some certain categories of records where, the really, really old stuff where it's, it's quite clear that it's not going to be needed, sort of taking a hybrid approach to it. But so I appreciate those comments.
Yeah, and I would agree on the hybrid because I think you can, one, could potentially do what I've described up front on the easier stuff to make a call on. And as you start to weed that stuff out, you start to remain theoretically with more and more with more valuable information, and that may be where more user involvement is focused.
And there was one point made in that dialogue right there which was great, and that's you have to have leadership support, right? You have to have that backing of the leadership teams to help you enforce these actions, because it's really in the best interest of the business and the business units themselves.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everyone chipping in and asking questions and providing answers. We are getting close to the end. We scheduled this for 45 minutes. Jim, would you like to have any final words before we sign off? Or if anyone has any last questions, let us know.
Well, while we're waiting for a couple of last-minute hands if they pop up, first off, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time out and joining us today. I'd also like to do a bit of a selfish plug for myself, Integro, IBM, StoredIQ for Legal. We will be at Legal Tech next week in New York, obviously focusing around the litigious aspects and legal processes, but I guarantee you I'm going to have at least 50 conversations around cleanup, records, governance, compliance. It's all intertwined, right? So if anybody's in the New York area or is already attending Legal Tech and know about that, look us up. We're going to be there. We've got lots of folks, and we're going to have a lot of fun and be able to have some pretty deep one-on-one conversations if you'd like.
And if anyone would like to schedule time with Jim or Scott or any of the Integro IBM team, feel free to contact me. I can help you get connected with whomever you'd like. Or if you have suggestions for future StoredIQ user groups, whatever it may be, I'm generally the person that at least moderates our user group on LinkedIn, etc. So I'm happy to help in any way I can. Looks like we don't have any lingering questions, so we can say goodbye.
Great. Thank you again.
Bye, guys.